Welcome to this clip on national courts and enforcement of EU state aid law. After this clip, you will have a solid understanding of the role national courts play in enforcing EU state aid law. In this video, we will explore the jurisdiction of national courts in state aid cases, identifying which domestic court has the authority to rule on such matters, and determining who has the right to initiate state aid proceedings before that particular court. We will discuss the rules of evidence and the burden of proof, and talk about how exactly national courts can enforce EU state aid law. To conclude, we will briefly address the derogations from the duty of national courts to act against unlawful aid and go over the role they play with regard to the implementation of recovery decisions adopted by the European Commission. A first role given to national courts is determining whether a specific measure constitutes unlawful state aid. This involves acting against a breach of the standstill obligation. In that regard, it must be noted that national courts are also entrusted with the enforcement of the Commission's exemption and de minimis rules. These rules provide exemptions from notification and standstill obligations. National courts, when necessary, must act against infringements of these rules. This marks a significant responsibility, since more than 96% of new state aid measures since 2015 were adopted under the General Block Exemption Regulation. Moreover, national courts contribute to the implementation of Commission recovery decisions. As institutions of member states, they are mandated to take appropriate measures ensuring the effective implementation of recovery decisions. In the absence of EU procedural law, member states maintain procedural autonomy. This allows them to determine the jurisdiction and procedural rules for state aid cases. The diversity in approaches is evident, with some member states establishing specialized courts for state aid matters, while others designate existing civil and administrative courts. Pursuant to the EU principle of procedural autonomy, national law establishes the criteria for legal standing in domestic state aid proceedings, determining which parties can challenge unlawful state aid within the boundaries of the EU principles of equivalence and effectiveness. National courts possess the authority to determine if a measure qualifies as state aid, including examining whether the aid can be seen as de minimis aid and whether the aid meets the Altmark conditions. Once it is established that a state measure is state aid within the meaning of Article 107, Paragraph 1 TFEU, national courts have to consider whether this measure constitutes unlawful state aid. This means that they must find an answer to the question whether the aid is implemented in violation with the standstill obligation. In that regard, it must be noted that national courts also have the power to evaluate whether an alleged unlawful state aid measure fulfills the criteria set out in a block exemption regulation or constitutes existing aid. Pursuant to the EU principle of national procedural autonomy, the national rules of evidence are applicable to national state aid litigation within the boundaries of the principles of equivalence and effectiveness. Moreover, national law determines which party has to provide evidence to demonstrate that the claim is valid. When national courts identify an aid measure as unlawful state aid, they must apply remedies under their national law to rectify market distortions. The Commission suggests various remedies in its notice on state aid enforcement. Remedies suggested by the Commission include the suspension or annulment of the implementation of the aid measure, recovery of the aid, charging an illegality interest, repayment of taxes or parafiscal levies, and awarding damages. National courts can adopt different remedies depending on the situation, ensuring the restoration of market balance. Interim measures involve suspending or terminating the implementation of unlawful state aid, preventing aid disbursement, or ordering repayment with illegality interest. National courts play a crucial role in implementing Commission recovery decisions with two primary scenarios identified. In the first situation, member states initiate proceedings to compel beneficiaries to return aid, aligning with Commission decisions. The second situation involves interested parties, like aid beneficiaries, seeking protection against national measures implementing recovery decisions. Additionally, an interested party might request a national court to order a member state to implement a Commission recovery decision. National courts must fully enforce Commission recovery decisions. Also, national courts are prohibited from taking actions contradicting a Commission decision, even if the decision faces an appeal for annulment. they cannot suspend proceedings solely because of a pending annulment appeal. Due to the stringent recovery obligation, national courts must ensure that beneficiaries cease benefiting from the aid, irrespective of ongoing legal challenges at the EU courts. This clip provided an overview of the role of national courts in enforcing EU state aid law. In the enforcement, member states are tasked with designating a qualified national court. These courts hold the authority to take action against violations of the standstill obligation, enforce exemption and de minimis rules, and implement recovery decisions. When a national court identifies state aid as unlawful, it must, in accordance with national law, apply remedies to rectify market imbalances. This underscores the significant role national courts play in upholding the principles of EU state aid regulations and brings us to the end of the clip on the enforcement of EU state aid law by national courts. Thank you for your interest and attention.